So I suppose for the recording, for that might be the final time. Hopefully, you'll see this today. Salesforce is a publicly traded company. Any purchasing decisions you make should be based upon technology today. So, look, really appreciate your time here this afternoon. Hopefully, this will be the most exciting session of the day because everybody loves security and compliance. So again, look, we all know it's a really important part. When we see the Salesforce platform, we talk about, trust being our number one value, but trust is really, really important when it comes. You just heard a moment ago about, trust in your data to get the right results, but also how do you manage sharing your data? How do you manage who has access to the data? How do you classify your data? And the various different obligations that businesses have when it comes to managing their data, because it reflects upon your brand. If a company has a data breach, it's very detrimental to the brand because customers will then start to think, well, if they're not protecting my data, should I do business with them? So with the platform, the idea is that, it's a unified platform, and what runs on core and how you manage that. The way Salesforce works is the platform underpins everything that we do. And then you have Agentforce Sales, Agentforce Service, Agentforce Marketing are extensions of that and access to that data that uses role-based access control and licensing and permissions to determine what your users can get access to. And that's what businesses love about the platform, is that you can control at a very granular level what you give your users access to. And that can apply equally to your partners and to your customers and so on. But let's unpack this as to how it's actually delivered from a security and a service perspective. At the very bottom here, we have Hyperforce. And many people in the audience here heard of Hyperforce before? Okay, a few nodding heads. But basically, for those that haven't, all Hyperforce is the ability to deploy Salesforce on Salesforce managed public cloud infrastructure. Initially, it was all on AWS. We've now got some regions deployed on Google Cloud as well. But that's ultimately helped us align around things like where customers have data residency obligations. From a compliance perspective, they need their data to be resident in a certain jurisdiction. We're not in the data center business, but we want to be able to roll out new instances of Salesforce as quick as possible. But also using the hyperscalers, we can, benefit in terms of availability and scale because the likes of AWS and GCP operate at 11 nines. And again, because we're running on that infrastructure, we have the benefit of that. And sustainability is another kind of value of Salesforce. So we're proud to be a net zero platform as well. But when it comes to the data that's actually running on this infrastructure, within Salesforce, as you know, you can store your own customer data and you can extend it like a traditional relational database. But we also have Data 360, which is that data lakehouse, whereby you can bring in both structured and unstructured data and federate data from external data sources. And this is going to allow you to create those unified profiles that can trigger data actions. And you've heard already today about being able to vectorize unstructured data to make it queryable using semantics and so on. And then, as I said, we do have partnerships with and connectors for literally any data source, whereby you can bring in data that you're already storing in your own lake or warehouse. So the likes of AWS, Google, Databricks, and Snowflake, and so on. But it's this unified metadata framework is what's really important, because this metadata layer enables us to understand that data. So what type of data, what's the relationships between the data? And that's both, data within Salesforce and those external systems. So this allows you to put governance on that, for want of a better term. So by being able to classify that, and then with that role-based access control, you can now determine what your users, both human and agents, can do and see. Because when it comes to deploying AI, one of the biggest risks is not what it can do, it's what it can potentially also do. And that's why you need to have the insight, the observability, and be able to manage those guardrails. And this is something that, because of the metadata framework, we enable you to do relatively easily. Then from an AI perspective, we obviously have our own models. We also allow you to use public models we have agreements with that they will not persist their data. Just for clarity from the outset, your data is not our product. You own and manage your own data within Salesforce. You can take it in, take it out whenever you want. But any data that you share with those large language models as part of a prompt, again, as I say, there is the Agentforce trust layer, but there is also the contractual assurance that will not be persisted by the large language models or used to train them. And you also have the flexibility around bringing your own model as well. So you can, if you've already built another model and you want to leverage in that within Salesforce, absolutely no problem. And even in Data Cloud, you can build up your own models from a predictive model, because while everybody's talking about generative, predictive hasn't gone away, and it's still hugely valuable to give you, insights or results as to what the estimated or the likelihood of something happening, and then you can use that to trigger other actions. So I spoke a lot about trust a moment ago, and we're really going to unpack this momentarily. So as I said, it is built in at every layer, and we're going to talk about how that can get executed upon as well. And then finally, at the tooling layer, we have our various no-code, low-code, and even vibe code builders now as well. Another thing that I'd like to kind of point out is the workflows and automations and APIs. Not everything needs AI. And I mean that, like, if something can be handled through a workflow, you don't have to try and use an agentic layer to handle it. Automation is hugely important. So think about how you can leverage those workflows. As you've probably heard earlier this morning, like the scale of this is immense at the moment. And also we've invested really, really heavily in recent years with regards to proving that whole experience. And you can now actually go in and build flows with Agentforce. You can actually go in and ask and say, I want to build a flow that does this using natural language, and it will go off and build it for you. You might have to tweak it a little, but it's definitely an accelerator to delivering it. And then, as I said, from a DevOps perspective, one of the great things is that you can manage and control how you move what you build and test from your sandbox environments into production. Now, so while we have this AI revolution that we're in the midst of at the moment, everybody believes that the importance of the security and the trust of your data has become more prevalent than ever. And we understand that everybody needs to protect their data. Even you as customers of Salesforce know that we protect your data that we use to manage you as an account. But what we have is really a shared responsibility model. And what I mean by that is Salesforce as a service provider is responsible for keeping your data safe and secure, available and performant. But then you have your own responsibility with regards to how you manage who gets access to your data that you've stored in Salesforce. So when people come in to do their job in your various different businesses, you have the autonomy to control what somebody needs. And again, adopting things like the principle of least privilege, so that you only give people access to the information they need to fulfill their duty. As you've probably already implemented through role-based access control, managers can see, the records belonging to their subordinates and so on and so forth. And we give you a very flexible approach that you can manage, we extending it with permission sets, and they can even be session-based if you want. So it says there's a lot of granularity with which you can use to manage that right down to that field level security. Now, we break it up really across 3 layers. There's the invisibles, the configurables, and the enhanceables. And we're going to start off with like the invisibles, and this is really Salesforce's obligation to manage what you want. So things like this metadata architecture, the contractual assurances, our secure software development perspective, life cycle, and how we manage the storage. And again, this is all independently verified. You can go and look at our trust.salesforce.com. You can get the audit reports and so on. And this is all part of our contractual agreement. So when you see all these, this information that you get here, and even things like your site reliability and disaster recovery, as I said, that's all done on your behalf as part of your subscription. So the invisibles are really at the network layer, the application security layer, and then obviously our secure infrastructure. But next up, we're going to take a look at what is your responsibility and what you can do out of the box when it comes to configuring what you have within Salesforce. And these are the built-in controls. So little things like ensuring that users, when authenticating, use multi-factor authentication, even if you're using single sign-on through another identity provider, trying to enforce that. Other things like IP whitelisting, making sure that they can only log in from within the corporate IP range. Because you can even restrict users by profile right down to time of day. So maybe somebody's working in your contact center, maybe they should only be allowed to log in between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Any activity outside of those hours may be cause for concern. I mentioned the principle of least privilege, that you can manage that on a per role basis. And then also things like auditing. So we have an audit log that comes out of the box with regards to login forensics. Same thing around, user audit trail as to what data they're changing. And also from a setup and a configuration perspective as well, because from a governance reason, you need to make sure that people aren't going in and making changes in production. So managing how you do that, are they following best practice when it comes to making changes? And then something that's really important as well is going in and looking at your security health check. I've been pontificating for years to people about, setting up a regular cadence around our calendar notification to go in and check regularly how your org is configured, because you can go in here into setup and it'll tell you how the configuration of your instance and how it deviates from baseline standards. You can even define your own baseline standards, and then it gives you the link to take action if there's something you need to remediate. So again, it'll highlight if an administrator made a configuration change that may potentially introduce a concern. But one of the new features we're bringing out in spring 26 is the ability to actually have a weekly acknowledgement of that. So it'll go in. You schedule this every week, and if there's any changes, it will alert you to that. So this is a really good new feature that hopefully everybody's going to adopt. Now, being proactive about security begins from a good housekeeping perspective. So obviously the recommendation is to perform user awareness and training. If people know how to use your instance of Salesforce well, know that you're monitoring what they do, it tends to enforce best practice. You've already heard me talking about the principle of least privilege. We all know what that is. And again, understanding roles and profiles and what people need to do. And this should be from a foundation layer when you're implementing things. And also, it's not a case of creating profiles for users and tweaking them as appropriate. Use permission sets, because you can also use permission sets now to be more restrictive, whereas typically they were, opened up access. Now you can also use them to restrict access. With the strong authentication and multi-factor, and then the login IP ranges, and then obviously making sure your security contact is added to your Salesforce account. So in the unlikely event, or in the unfortunate event of an incident happening, even out of hours, they will be notified. And one of the other things that we're bringing in now is the ability to actually streamline the administrative process by being able to use Agentforce to actually help you go and ask questions where things are. Say you use natural language to tell it what you want to do. So rather than having to, find out where everything is in the setup menu, this is something that we're in pilot today with as well. Now, we're going to talk about the enhanceables, and these are add-on capabilities with which you can use to augment your compliance and your security posture. Now, the reason why people look at this is they may be operating in regulated industries, or everybody's customer data is very valuable to them. And you may have considerations around the growth and the maturity of your org. Are you ensured that you're following kind of security best practices? Because, many businesses have, implemented Salesforce in the beginning and they've grown and evolved. And there may be room for improvement with regards to how they're configured. Also, the level of sensitive data that you may be storing. Have you got enough governance on who has access to that data? You could be in a specific industry that's high threat, such as financial services. And then also, we've regulatory requirements for everybody now, regardless of whether you're in a regulated industry. Even because you're storing customer information, you have to adhere to GDPR requirements. And then obviously there's the resource constraints. Everybody can't be an expert on everything in terms of your administrator. So how are you going to manage that? And that's why we've broken it down across data security, compliance, and resilience. So on the left-hand side, from a data security perspective, we have what we call our Shield products. So Shield is a suite, or you can buy those individual products with the exception of Data Detect, which comes as part of the suite. But event monitoring, platform encryption, and field audit can be purchased as a suite or individually. Event monitoring is what gives you insight into who's doing what, when, and where within your instance of Salesforce. So you've over 80 different logs of when somebody looks at a record, downloads a record, downloads a report, where they log in from, what browser they're using, and so on. And you can then use this to understand not just the nefarious kind of behavior, but also adoption and performance as well. Then we have platform encryption, and that is the ability to encrypt your tenant with a key that you own and manage. Now, out of the box, your data is encrypted both in transit and at rest. But if you want to encrypt it with a key that you own and manage, this is what it solves. And again, that could be for regulatory obligations or for contractual obligations with your customers. And then we have Field Audit Trail. And out of the box, you can retain an audit log of changes to your historic data for 18 months on 20 fields per object. With this, you can define your retention period or else store it indefinitely. For by default 60, it can be extended to 100 fields per object as well. And then what Data Detect does, it enables you to go in and query your long text area fields and so on to see if there's any sensitive or personally identifiable information in that. And therefore, you can then, you can classify that data so that you're compliant with your obligations. Next up, we're going to look at kind of Security Center, and that is where you can centralize the security management. So if you have multiple orgs or even single orgs and multiple sandboxes, and you want to make sure that they're all adhering to your standards, or you're not making any changes in it, because we often see cases where customers have their production orgs really well secured and monitored, and then they have their sandbox with, shall we say, less governance on it. And when you refresh the sandbox, your customer data is coming into that and you may not be masking it. So it's good to know what people are doing in those environments as well. And when I'm speaking of sandboxes there, you have the ability to generate different types of sandboxes, so full copy, partial, developer and developer pro. So full copy and partial will actually take data out of production. And that's why we've created data mask and seed, which will allow you to anonymize or pseudonymize that data when the sandbox has been refreshed, so that again, you can build and test with real world type of data, but it's not actually active customer data as well. And from a seed perspective, you can use that to generate synthetic data to populate sandboxes too. And then we have Privacy Center. And Privacy Center is the ability to handle things like data subject access requests, right to be forgotten requests, archive policies based upon retention obligations. So you can build out all these policies to adhere to not just GDPR, but literally any privacy regulation. We haven't made it regulatory specific. It's a framework to enable you to comply with any of those. And it's something that can be done easily and quickly. And also you have that forensic log if somebody sent you a request for a data subject access request, so you can show how quickly you responded to it to be adherent to the regulation. And also, Salesforce has a consent management framework built in natively on the platform. You can use that to manage their consent and preferences. And because this is all synchronized into Data Cloud, then when it comes to engagement, you can make sure that that's being respected. And you'll also have a forensic log if a customer changes their consent. Because you'll also need to build policies around if a customer wants to be forgotten, because certain laws may supersede the right to be forgotten. I often give the example of you can't go into a bank, take out a loan, and then request that they forget you, because obviously the financial services regulations supersede GDPR. And then finally, from a resilience perspective, we have backup and recover and archive. So I mentioned a moment ago about Salesforce, from a business continuity and disaster recovery perspective, automatically kind of replicating your data across 3 availability zones. So why would you need a backup and recover? What it's really about is recovering from self-inflicted problems. And by that, it could be a case of maybe somebody negligently deletes records and you didn't catch it in time before it went out of the recycle bin, or you did an integration procedure that modified a number of records and it turned out to be wrong. So again, it gives you the autonomy to manage your own recovery processes by managing those backups. And archive is the ability to, when you want to archive data, to put it into what I would call warm storage, in that it will take it off the platform, move it to what we call near core, and have the ability to federate it back in. So as soon as certain data becomes non-transactional, for want of a better term, you can archive it. You can still have it referenced in Salesforce, but it's not, it's not clogging up your org, for want of a better term. And with that, let's kind of move into a demonstration, just to give you a quick overview of what this actually looks like in reality. So here I'm in Security Center, and the idea of Security Center is where you can come in and connect your different tenants, and then you can get stuff like any threat information, how your health checks have been performing, and so on. And if you scroll down as well, it'll highlight the various different authentication mechanisms that people have been using. If I come in here and I wanted to see something like somebody with view all data, that would show me if there'd been any changes between those windows or a period of when I wanted to look at that. You can also go in and do security policies on a per tenant basis. So if I wanted to, say, create a new security policy around an IP range or maybe password configuration, for example, I can just come in here, give it a name, specify, I want to now modify this from, 90 days, their password will expire in 30 days. I can specify the minimum lengths. And then I would just come down here and specify and say which tenants I want to apply that to. So if you think about this in instances where you may have multiple orgs and multiple sandboxes, this can become quite a laborious process, making sure that the same standards are being applied to all. And so that's just one example. So let me just cancel out of that. But since the own acquisition, we actually have some new features as well brought in. So one of these is like security insights. So here it'll go in and proactively look at the configuration of your org. It will give you insights with regards to things like your access control, your security model integration, and it'll also give you a risk score. And if you kind of click into that, it will tell you what fields are, the determinants of this risk score as well. So again, gives you really kind of proactive insight into any potential risks that you have with regards to the configuration of your org. Now, another really nice feature is how you want to go in and classify your data. So with that, if I come in here and do data classification, it will actually go in and take a look at all the objects. So if I wanted to say I want to classify any email fields or telephone number fields with regards to compliance and sensitivity, I can just come in here and I can filter this. I can specify the data type is email, and that list will automatically then refresh to go in and select only those email fields. Now, if I then wanted to go in and select all those fields and I want to change the value, I want to say they're actually confidential information, and I can do the compliance category of PII, and I don't want HIPAA and GDPR. I can now apply that straight away to those 21 fields. So now that has gone in, classified that data, and we've really streamlined that whole process with regards to how you want to use that. We also have another really nice feature here with regards to who sees what within your instance of Salesforce. So if we come in here and I want to look at a particular user or a particular profile, this was usually kind of challenging, to be fair, in the old days. So if I go in and specify a user, so say I put in my own name, and I find myself here, straight away, it will actually look at those different objects, the fields, the level of access I have to them. So again, get quite good insight into that. And if I can, bring that down here and I can see the individual fields where I have access. So while that's pretty informative, in a lot of cases, sometimes you may get something's working for one user and not for another, and you're trying to identify where the disconnect is, shall we say. So I can do things like maybe compare users. So if I come in and pick another user here and I select Andrew Fife, it will now actually show me any differences between our profiles. And again, the ones that are illuminated in yellow indicate those differences straight away. So that was a quick overview of Security Center, and I wanted to show you that because it can be very complementary to event monitoring when it comes to using the classifications to build things like transaction security policies and so on. Now, this is event monitoring, and this is the visualizations of those event logs. So typically you might want to start off with something like My Trust, and that'll show you, your number of active users, things like your average page time, your experience page time, and so on. And you can do things like maybe set a notification or an alert upon that. So if it goes over certain thresholds you want to be used. But typically, other things that would be critically important would be maybe login information. So where are my users logging in from? What type of devices are they using? What browser, what operating system, and so on, because it can help you mitigate against the risks around shadow IT. You can also do really nice things here, like filter it based upon a user or filter it based upon a user agent, for example. So if I selected Quip, so I could see that maybe somebody here has a connected app. And this would be, while it's okay if they've got permission to do it, but often it could be a case of maybe if somebody has a connected app, they might feel more liberated to, save data. But at least I have all those transactions being logged with regards to what they're doing. And you can also see where people are logging in from, and you have access to the raw data logs if you want to go in and explore that as well. Another kind of useful feature is things like your API insights. So if you look in here, you can see how your instance of Salesforce has been integrated with, who's calling those services, who's looking at that data. And again, while this is really useful from a performance perspective and also what endpoints are being used, one of the nice things that you can also do here is, say, for example, you want to check for any error codes. Say somebody's sending in a bad request. Maybe that's going to lead to data quality issues. This is where I can bring this down here. It'll facet to show me that, and then I can break it down even by a particular status code. So maybe I just want to see where I'm getting a 404 error, and it'll highlight that. So that's the kind of visualizations of that information. We have various different dashboards to highlight all that information, and you can configure it. So if I wanted to go in and look at who's looking at a specific page, that'll load up, and I can filter it down by a user or a role or a profile. So, but event monitoring actually includes another thing which we call transaction security policies. And with a transaction security policy, you can actually be proactive around blocking or being alerted to certain behaviors. So for example, if I wanted to come in here and run a report, and I have a report here that's showing my sensitive information, shall we say, around accounts and contacts. Now, if I came in here and I want to do a new transaction security policy, I can build it really quickly and easily, either using Condition Builder, which is a wizard, or I could use something like Apex. And if I go here and next, I'll select the event. I could say maybe it's a report event, and I'll say all conditions are met. And then we say rows processed, and we'll say greater than equal to 50. Now, I could put in an operation and say, and it's been exported, but you get the idea. So you can build up the kind of requirements as you like. Then I can select what action to take. Now, it could have none, block, or multi-factor. So you might wonder and say, well, what's none mean? None means you just want to notify the administrator that it's happening, but allow it to continue. I can block it, or I could look for an out-of-band password to ensure that it's a human doing it. Now I can send an email notification or an in-app notification. I can put in the recipient. I'll be making myself, and then I can actually have specific messages I want. So I'll just call this Adriaticon demo, and most importantly thing is to enable it. And that's all that's required to configure that policy. Now, so if I come back in here and I run that report again, it's blocked that information as well because I went over the threshold, okay? So that and then you'll also see that I got a notification as the administrator to let me know that that's happening. Now, just for illustrative purposes, to show you the value of classifying your data, let me delete this for a second. So I have classified, if we come back in here and take a look at our contact and the famous Lauren Boyle, who we saw earlier, if we look here at if we edit the object and look at fields and relationships, and we have her passport field, passport number. So we've classified that as PII, GDPR, and confidential data. Now I can create a transaction security policy that'll say, if anybody tries to run a report with confidential data in it and they don't have a certain permission, I want to block that. So let's go back in and look at that report again. And again, the way this policy has been configured, it'll go across all objects because it'll actually look at the fields that are being included in the report. So we go back into report, we run this again, runs fine, and now we edit this. And I'm going to add the column passport. I think I'm getting close to needing glasses. And if we update the preview, it will be blocked there straight away. Okay, so again, not allowing you to take out that classified information that you're able to see to fulfill your duty. So hopefully that gave you a kind of good overview with regards to some of the enhanceables. Just two quick things. Security Center is now at Agentforce that will actually use the power of AI to proactively alert you to risks and concerns within your instance. And the same thing with Privacy Center, helping you be compliant with the various different regulations. So thank you very much for your time. I bang on in seconds.
Oh, and really on time.
Okay. So anyway, I'm hanging around as well, so if there's any questions, but really appreciate you spending time with us this afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's a time management. Thank you.